doctrine. That means that normally when we read the secret doctrine, because of the language there, we interpret this as a description of the manifestation of the cosmos and the solar system and the planets, etc. But because Blavatsky said in these 4 ideas that I mentioned briefly, they are in the book, she said that the human being is a microcosm of the macrocosm, so that all the processes, all the forces, all the states of consciousness that exist in the cosmos are reflected in a human being, all of them. So anything that you see described in the cosmos finds some correlation in a human being and human consciousness. Of course, adapted to a human being. We gave some examples like, we have the creative deity, the divine mind, which has the ideas for the cosmos, and then there is this energy, Fohat, that impresses those ideas in the cosmic matter. And that happens, it's just the same with our thoughts. On the mental plane, every thought we are producing has an energy that in Hinduism they call Kriya Shakti, which shapes the mental matter and produces a thought form which has a life of its own and will tend to reproduce itself in other places, or people try to stimulate the same kind of thoughts, etc. Well, this is a whole subject on its own. But we are constantly emanating little celestial beings, little angels or demons, depending on what we are producing psychologically. So the same power that is in the creative deity is in us in a reduced form. We cannot, as a human being, create a cosmos. However, as we evolve, because there are centers in our aura, let's say, that are directly connected to the cosmic centers. Blavatsky explains this in her esoteric instructions. The enlightened being, not only enlightened being, an enlightened being is one that has discovered his or her true nature as this one self. But what Blavatsky's teachers are is more than an enlightened being. It is what we call an occultist, which means an enlightened being that has activated in him or herself all the cosmic forces that are latent. For example, I like very much Nisargadatta Maharaj. He was a sage in India, belonging to the non-dual tradition. And, I think he was an enlightened being. It's just an opinion because it's hard to tell. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna asked Krishna, how do we identify an enlightened being? Is there a way that they speak, that they see, sit, that they eat, etc.? And Krishna says, no, you can't really identify by external sign. Anyway, so Nisargadatta often talked about being in touch with absolute wisdom, in his own terminology. And somebody asked, so do you know if it is raining right now in New York? And he said, no, I don't, but just because I haven't trained that aspect. We can train that and we can know what is going on there, but I'm not interested in that. I'm just interested in realizing the truth, not in working in the illusion, let's say. And that's the difference. There is a Mahatma letter where one of the masters say, although we agree with Advaita Vedanta philosophy in connection to the ultimate reality, Parabrahman, the one, the unity, etc., we are not Advaitis, he said. And I think that the reason is because normally in the non-dual traditions, the focus is on ignore the illusion, discover the reality, and let the illusion alone. But an occultist needs to discover reality, but also makes the vow to remain in the illusion, to help all of us who are, groping in the shadows, And of course, an enlightened being like Nisargadatta is helping by teaching, but the adepts become co-workers of nature. They develop all these powers so that they can help nature in the evolution by manipulating or directing cosmic forces, etc. So they become a creative being, a being that is part of the creative hierarchies. So all those things are potentially in us, and when a person becomes enlightened and an occultist, that person knows how to connect the individual centers of force with the cosmic centers of force, and then you can channel the cosmic forces and perform things that seem to be miracles.
Is that what is meant in our three objects? Okay, where it says the to explore.
Mm-hmm. The latent powers.
Powers in man. Yeah.
Yes, I think the third object points to powers, something that is kept secret, and you will be trained by the masters when you have attained the degree of enlightenment that you need to be able to use these powers correctly. So what the third object means is that we need to know the theory of this, because we keep that information from incarnation to incarnation. You know how many of you may have come to theosophy and say, "All this sounds so familiar. Yes, I get it." And as you read, you can assimilate it quickly. And some other people struggle and maybe they drop after a year. Well, the only difference is that in one case you have studied this in the past, and in the other case, it's probably the first time that this person comes in touch with these teachings. So Blavatsky, when she wrote the esoteric instructions, she wanted people, those members who are interested in, at some point in some lifetime, helping in this way, she wanted people to learn the theory, this idea that we human beings can reflect reflect all the powers and states of consciousness and kinds of matter, etc., that are in the cosmos. We are the only beings that reflect the whole, because it is in human beings where heaven and earth kiss, so to say. In animals, the higher nature is still asleep, is in the process of awakening. When a certain level of awakening happens, that animal becomes a human being. And celestial beings have dropped the lower nature. They are living on the spiritual nature. It is only in human beings that the two natures are active, the spiritual and the lower nature. And that's why we have conflict, because the two are influencing our consciousness. But that is also why a human being can operate.
You guys are too close.
No, I think it's getting. Yeah, I didn't join the audio. So that's why the human being can host the forces of all the planes, because we have the 7 principles active in us. So because of that feature, we can interpret the things in the secret doctrine in terms of our own consciousness. And Michelle will show some examples of how to do this later. But what I'm going to do in this talk is to explain a little more in detail what I just said and show you some quotes from HPV. Okay, I can get it from here. So let me read some quotes from the book. First, I referred to this quote, and this is from Master KH, where he says the truths and mysteries of occultism constitute indeed a body of the highest spiritual importance, at once profound and practical for the world at large. Yet it is not as a mere addition to the tangled mass of theory or speculation in the world of science that they are being given to you. This was to a correspondent he was writing, but for the practical bearing on the interest of mankind. So Master KH was one of the authors of the Secret Doctrine. There is a letter where he says that himself and one of Blavatsky's teachers, Master Moria, were participating in the writing of the Secret Doctrine with HPV. So when they give all this theory, the master is saying here, all this theory is not given to you just for you to speculate philosophically, metaphysically, to create a new school of thought. All that is part of the study of the Secret Doctrine, but it's not the aim, it's not the goal. You may need to understand intellectually what the Secret Doctrine says, but not because that's the end in itself. It's because you need to apply what the Secret Doctrine says. And this is what the Master is saying here. We expect you to use all this information, the truths and mysteries of occultism, for their practical bearing on the interests of mankind. So HPV said that all esoteric teachings and mythologies that contain esoteric teachings can be interpreted in 7 different ways. She says, for example, there are 7 keys of interpretation to every symbol and allegory. That which may not fit a meaning, say from the psychological or astronomical aspect, will be found quite correct from the physical or metaphysical. The idea here, for example, we were talking about the ring pass knot of the Earth when talking about the moon, and the ring pass knot, the idea is that this is a limit that you cannot go beyond. Now, this limit may not be physical. We have sent, a spaceship to the moon, but what we were talking about, the ring pass knot may not be physical, that when you hit that limit, then the spaceship, explodes. But it may be that organically you cannot survive beyond that ring pass knot. So when you are reading the esoteric teachings, you have to see, sometimes they apply on all levels, sometimes they are applying on one level and not the other in particular. So she says there are 7 keys of interpretation, how you interpret the same sentence. Now, of course, if you look at, okay, let me see what the 7 keys are. In typical Blavatsky fashion, you will find like 24, 25 different keys that she uses, with an astrological key, with a mathematical key. Our friend Ariel Sanat, he counted how many keys he found, occasions in which HPV says with this key or that key, this is the meaning. And he found 19 names. So metaphysical, spiritual, physical, psychological, anthropological. But you see, this means a myth or a teaching in the Secret Doctrine, you can interpret it from this different point of view. Numerical, physiological, astronomical, mystical, etc. In the book, I did an exercise, tried to put together the ones that seem to be connected, like number 2, numerical, geometrical, arithmetical. They all may be part of the same key. So I tried to arrange all those in 7 categories. But in any case, what is important is that there are 7 ways of interpreting any teaching. Now, she says no one occultist, if he is true to his colors, can give out the meaning of all the 7 mysteries of wisdom, even if he himself is acquainted with all, which would be a marvel indeed. For those 7 mysteries in toto, as a whole, are known thoroughly only to the masters of wisdom. So HPV says, in the Secret Doctrine, I'm trying to give some teachings and give interpretations in a few keys, but I cannot claim to know all this, the knowledge of these teachings on all the different keys of interpretations or levels. That's something that only the adepts know. And also, there are many interpretations that cannot be given because they are potentially harmful. Like in the Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky says that when scientists thought that the atom was a small ball that was indivisible, was static, it didn't move, it didn't vibrate, it couldn't be divided. Blavatsky says there is great energy in the atom, and she didn't say anything more. And then, of course, we know this was discovered by Einstein, and the first thing that we do is to create a bomb. So there are many things that Blavatsky says we cannot give out this information because it is dangerous. Humanity will misuse it. So some things have to be kept secret. So Blavatsky says our explorations are by no means complete, nor do they pretend to give out the full text or to have been read by the help of more than 3 or 4 keys out of the sevenfold bunch of esoteric interpretation. And even this has only been partially accomplished. The work of the secret doctrine, or the work of explaining in all these keys, all these teachings, is too gigantic for any one person to undertake, far more to accomplish. So she says that in the secret doctrine, she talked about, or she explained the teachings from 3 or 4 keys. Reading the secret doctrine, you can speculate that these may be the keys. There is a metaphysical aspect to the secret doctrine, to the teachings there. There is an astronomical aspect, the cosmos, how it is being developed. There is what she calls theogonical aspect, that's the emanation of the gods. And then there is the anthropological aspect, that it is how humanity evolved. Now, one of the keys is a psychological key, which is what I was saying, how to interpret these teachings in terms of our own mind and consciousness. Let me show you here that this can be done. We can see it in several quotes. This is a quote from HPV where she talks about the law of correspondences, this idea that as above, so below, etc. So she says the law of correspondences will lead you to the discovery of the greatest mysteries of macrocosmical life. But to arrive at the macrocosmical, you must begin by the microcosmical. That is, you must study man, the microcosm. Every time that Blavatsky uses man, first because that was accepted at the time, and second because the word man originally was not meant to refer to the male gender. The word man comes from the Sanskrit root, the same Sanskrit root as the word manu. Manu means the thinker. The quality that characterizes the human kingdom, let's say, is that we can think. In biology, we are just animals. We are part of the animal kingdom. Now, esoteric philosophy says, biologically, yes, we are animals, but we have the capacity to think, and that makes us a different kingdom from a higher perspective. We are the thinkers. We are the manus, let's say. And the word man derives from the same root, Sanskrit root, because this is part of the Indo-European languages. That means the mind, manas, to think, the thinker, manu. So when she uses man, she's referring, and she says in some quotes, when I say man, I don't even refer to the humanity on this planet. I refer to any form of life that has developed the ability to think. So in Blavatsky, it's a technical term. So what she's saying here is that by means of self-knowledge, you can discover what is in the cosmos. We have heard that in the oracle of Delphi or Delphi that says, man, know yourself and you will know the cosmos and the gods, something like that. So this is what she's saying here. You can discover by means of this law the greatest mysteries of the cosmos But to arrive at that discovery, you have to start by yourself. You must study yourself. Um, so here is part of that law of correspondences. She says the 7 planes in the cosmos correspond to the 7 states of consciousness in a human being. It remains with him to attune the 3 higher states in himself to the 3 higher planes in the cosmos, in the macrocosm. But before he can attempt to attune those states in us and in the cosmos, he must awaken the 3 seeds to life and activity. This is connected to what I said about the adepts. We have a correspondence in our higher nature to a correspondence to the divine planes in the cosmos. But in our higher nature, those seeds, those centers, let's say, are asleep. They are not activated. So first we need to awaken those, and then we need to attune them with the cosmic. Because when you awaken those centers in yourself, you have access to all kinds of powers, psychic powers, etc. If you are not attuned with the unity, you become what is called a black magician. You start using all that for your own benefit. So we always have to be, this is why theosophy puts so much emphasis on unity, on recognizing that you are part of that unity, so that when the time comes for you to awaken these things, you are rooted in a very strong ethical foundation so that you will never use your powers to benefit in any individual part because you feel, you know, you are the whole and you are everyone. So this is why Blavatsky says, let us study man, therefore, but if we separate him for one moment from the universal whole, or view him in isolation, we shall either land in black magic or fail most ingloriously in our attempt. So this is why all these teachings are not in the secret doctrine. They are in the esoteric instructions. When you read the secret doctrine, there are very few hints as to how to interpret the secret doctrine in psychological and with the psychological key. And I think the reason is because, as we are going to see, this is very practical, and this can really produce spiritual development if you work with it. But then she didn't feel comfortable sharing this with the whole world, so she taught this to a smaller group of members in the esoteric section that she had founded, so that these people who had a theosophical foundation could interpret these teachings in the right way. So how to use the psychological key or examples or sources of information for this are mostly in the esoteric instructions, which is what I'm quoting here. So for example, here Blavatsky says the 7 hierarchies of celestial beings have a direct bearing upon and relation to the human principles, since each of these hierarchies is, in fact, the creator and source of the corresponding human principle. What Blavatsky is saying here, when we talk about my emotional body, for example, my emotional body, you can, the one in each of us, you can visualize it as being a cell within the aura of one of these 7 primordial celestial beings. The emotional body, the substance and the life in the emotional nature of each of us come from that celestial being, which, for example, in astrology, they talk about Mars as being the planet of war and passion and energy, etc. Esoterically, that means that the planetary spirit, because planets have their own consciousness, so the planetary spirit of the planet that we call Mars is the source of those kind of qualities in all creatures, not only human beings, but also animals, plants, etc. So whenever you see a quality that has to do with how Mars is normally explained in astrology, that means that in the composition of the emotional nature of that sentient being, there is a strong influence of this celestial being, for example. The same with all the different principles in ourselves. You can think a human being, those diagrams with bubbles that intersect, then the Venn diagrams. Well, a human being is like a Venn diagram where you have the intersection of the seven celestial beings, and that's what produces the vehicle for a monad to express itself through the different planes. So you could separate all the celestial beings from us one by one, and then you are left with the monad, the divine spark, without any vehicle of expression. So my body is not mine, my emotional body is not mine, my mental, etc. And this is why astrology works, because the motion of the planets represent different phases in the activity of the planetary spirits of those planets. So at some point, the planetary spirit of Mars, let's say, since we are taking this as an example, may be more active. And that means that all the matter that is connected to that planetary spirit will be more active. And we have different proportions of matter in our auras, in all our vehicles, different proportions from the different celestial beings, according to karma, etc. So a person that has a strong amount, let's say, of matter connected to the Mars planetary spirit, when there is a heightened activity in that planetary spirit, in the consciousness, that will reflect itself in a heightened activity in the passionate nature of that person. If there is relatively little matter from Mars, then that we won't produce a big effect. And just talking generally, astrology is quite complex. But that is the principle. The principle is that when we talk about celestial beings, they are not just beings out there with no connection to us. We live and move and have our being in these celestial beings. So that's something that is important to keep in mind. So Blavatsky says the esoteric sciences have the double object of proving human beings to be identical in spiritual and physical essence with both the absolute principle and with God in nature. Blavatsky visualized God as the collectivity of all the creative forces. She didn't talk about God as an entity separate, isolated from the cosmos, but rather God is that creative principle which is mediated by all these celestial beings. So she says, we are identical. You see, she doesn't say we are connected, we are similar, we are identical with the absolute principle. Our Atman is the presence of the absolute in us, and Atman is what we call our real self. And then we are also identical with all these creative forces. All these creative forces are within us. So that's one of the objects of what she calls the esoteric science. And then demonstrating the presence in him of the same potential powers as exist in the creative forces of nature. So, they are the same point. One is that we are identical with these things, therefore, we have all those powers and states of consciousness, etc., available within us. And why does the esoteric science want to emphasize this? Because this approach is trying to encourage in people to start taking this path that in theosophy is called the occult path, so that we can start preparing ourselves to become a co-worker of nature, to help in the future. Let me go to the previous quote. So there was a quote here where HPV says basically that what we need to do is to become an active agent helping nature. And that is something that we cannot do it right away. We need to do a lot of work, and we need to know about this. And then gradually, after a series of incarnations working on this, we can become co-workers of nature. So for that reason, you need to know these things. For the public information that Blavatsky gave, she didn't mention much of this. But this is for those who, and you may not feel attracted to it today, and maybe in a few years you are. I remember at the beginning when I was in the TS, I was more interested in working on myself, my emotions and mind and all that. And I felt that all this was far from me. And I remember in a discussion or a talk with a friend said, I could care less about occultism. My work is somewhere else. And then as the years passed, that changed in the sense that I feel, okay, this is important for me to get a handle of and to study. So, we all have processes. If this doesn't attract you, just know about this and let the see where your divine spark wants to go.
Because
Yes.
I don't think you made a conscious choice to step onto the whole path. It's kind of something that was a natural impulse as you worked more and more on yourself.
Yeah. So she says that it's not that we make a conscious choice to be on the occult path. This is something that happens gradually. Let me make a disclaimer. I'm not claiming that I'm on the occult path. What I'm saying is that I find this part of what I feel that is something that I should be working on, preparing myself for whenever, this can be a possibility.
Right. So to clarify, we're not looking pretty much per se in this life to be on the occult path. What we're doing is preparing ourselves for the occult path.
Yes, exactly. So the preparation is dual. Is knowing about these principles, learning about the theory before we, that will be the foundation of our action, and beginning to work on the theosophical lines that have been set for us. The purifying of our lower nature, our body, our emotions, our minds, and the work to awaken our higher nature. I mean, you all, if you are trying to live the theosophical life, whether you know it or not, you are preparing yourself for the occult path. And that's always a choice of your soul. You as a soul, you are going to be given the choice in some incarnation. The master will come and tell you, do you want to be trained on this to help in this way humanity? And then you decide, because it's hard, really hard work. So you have the free choice, and you say, okay, I'll take it on, or I'm not sure I can deal with that kind of pressure and training and challenge. So let's see later, maybe years later, or the next incarnation. There is always freedom. Anyway, so here Blavatsky again says, as in the microcosm, the human being, so in the macrocosm, the universe. Every organ in the cosmos is a sentient entity, and every particle of substance, from the physical up to the spiritual atom, is a cell or a nerve center which communicates with the brain stuff, or that cosmic substance on the plane of the divine thought, in which the prime ideation for the cosmos is produced. So she's using physical language here to say, when you look at the cosmos has its own organs. Of course, you are not going to be a liver up there, but there are forces, there are celestial beings, there are processes that perform a function similar to what the liver performs in us. For example, I think there is a quote here, but one of the masters say, the sun is like the heart for the solar system. The heart is the one that distributes the blood and the vitality and the nutrition in our body. And the sun is the one that distributes the life, and the light and the source of vitality for its own system. So the sun, it correlates to the heart in a human being. So what the science is beginning to, there are a couple of papers that were published where they say that the structure of the cosmic web, what they call the cosmic web, that is all this connection, when you see the cosmos, things are not uniformly, things, I mean, galaxies, etc., are not uniformly distributed. They follow a kind of filaments and tissues, something that looks very much like the neurons. And there are a couple of scientific teams that have made modeling saying that in the body, the neural, network that we have in our brain is very similar in structure to this cosmic web. So what Blavatsky is saying here is exactly that. There is a correlation, the cosmos has its own organs, and there is a correlation between the cosmic organs and the human organs. So she says, therefore was man produced in the image of God. That is her interpretation of why God says, I made you in my own image. We are made in the image of the cosmos. Every cell in the human organism, she says, mysteriously corresponds with a like cell, all this in quotation marks, in the divine organism or the manifested universe. Only the latter cell, the cell in the macrocosm, the latter cell, the cell in the organism, assumes in the macrocosm the gigantic proportions of an intelligent unit in this or that hierarchy of celestial beings. So you see what perspective she's offering. This idea of the macrocosm and the microcosm as being reflections of each other, being connected with each other, being in touch. We can bring those energies through us if the centers that do that are awakened. But this is the potentiality of the human being. So here one of the masters say, this is HPV. One of the masters say, the sun is simply the reflection of the huge storehouse of our solar system, because the master says that the energy does not come from the sun. There is an energy that is coming from the inner place, and that on the physical plane results in the nuclear fusion, etc. But the Blavatsky's masters were saying that the sun will last not as long as there is matter in the sun, but as long as this flow of energy continues. So he continues, the sun being the heart and the brain of our pygmy universe, we might compare its feculi, which are these little like cells that you see in the sun. The sun, science agrees on with this, that there are like little cells that form of fire, let's say, that form the sun. They are called feculi. So we might compare its feculi, those millions of small, intensely brilliant bodies of which the sun's surface away from the spots is made up. We can compare those cells with the blood corpuscles in the sun, in that luminary. So you see, in very specific way, the masters know in very specific way what cosmic structures correspond with what particular aspect of the human being. They didn't explain all this, anatomy and physiology of the cosmos, but they know exactly these correlations, because when they have to tap into some energy, they have to use these correlations. So another quote from HPV, as man is a little copy of the universe, is the microcosm, he is governed by the same laws which rule the greater cosmos. There is in man a center or focus corresponding to each center of force or power in the universe. So this is what I've been saying, but here are the quotes. And then HPV says, students will now better comprehend the necessity of first studying the correspondences between our principles, the 7 principles, the constitution of human beings, which are but the various aspects of man, and the direct roots of these principles in the universe. And here, this will be the last quote, just to show you what was Blavatsky's thought about this. She says, let us remember that when we speak of men, it is a perfect analogy. Here again, she doesn't say it's similar, it is kind of, she says it's a perfect analogy with the cosmos. That which we call the absolute and the first logos is the higher self. The absolute corresponds to our higher self, Atman, and the first logos to the spiritual wisdom or buddhi in us. Then the third logos is the mind, corresponds to the mind. So whenever you see a description of Parabrahman, that is a description of your higher self. Whenever you see a description of the first logos, that is a description of buddhi in you. The description of the third logos is the description of your mind. Of course, you have to learn how to adapt those teachings, how to interpret those teachings with a psychological key. What does this cosmic activity mean in terms of the human mind, for example? And Michelle is going to show you some examples of that. So are there any comments or questions before we take the break? Here. And hold on a second so that people on Zoom, yes, coming, so that people on Zoom can hear you.
I guess it's obvious, but it says here, we call the absolute Parabrahman, and the first logo is the higher self, Atman. And the spiritual wisdom, buddhi, and man, that is the second logos? Or not? Because then it goes to the third logos.
Yeah, no, the second logos, sometimes Blavatsky in her dialogues with her students, she said the second logos is like an intermediate state, like a bridge, and many times is left off. We don't talk about it. We talk about the first one and then the third one. If you want to accommodate the second logos there, what I normally say is that, to me, when you see how the second logos is described, that can be taken to be the higher manas, and then the third logos is the lower manas, because in us, the manifested mind is our lower mind. The higher mind is semi-manifested. Some of the higher mind is coming to us, but it's not fully manifested. So in most of us, the third logos corresponds with our lower mind, that is the one that is manifesting. And the second logos corresponds with the higher mind. So second and third would correspond with manas. And there are some other quotes that seem to support this. There?
I'm not sure I need my phone. But so I'm going to try to. So what is it possible with this analogy that we on the earth, would she say, our minds, how we're acting now, can affect the mind of the cosmos? Or are we just this part of the smaller mind? We are just emanating but we can't affect the big picture. Like, is there anything that we, as I'm looking at our times right now, which of course humans have had that before, but yeah, how do we affect the cosmos?
Yeah, again, here we have to speculate, but I would say that yes, we affect the cosmos. Blavatsky many times talks about it's impossible to attain absolute happiness and joy and harmony without the whole of the sentient beings attaining the same. Because everything that happens in every sentient being is affecting the whole. And she says, by the way, she didn't say, but this is like in the Bodhisattva vow, where the Bodhisattva says, I'm not going to go into Nirvana until all sentient beings get into Nirvana. The principle is the same. She says, we cannot grow except through the bulk of humanity, because animals and plants, they are part of the universal mind. If we leave them alone, they are perfectly fine. All the troubles that plants, animals, and even minerals have is because of our ignorance. So if we focus on correcting human beings, then everything will be fine. And by this, I don't mean we should not try to help other kingdoms, because we are producing problems, we should try to help other kingdoms. But once we are not interfering with them, they are perfectly fine. The problem is human beings. So the idea, Blavatsky says, we cannot evolve except through the bulk of humanity. You cannot separate. So you can imagine that we are making the celestial beings a little sick. It's like when your body, your cells are not working properly, then you as an organism are sick. Now, this is part of the process of evolution. The celestial beings are also evolving. They are also trying to influence us in a certain direction. That's part of the power of the evolutionary force. And yes, we are all in the same, in the same car, driving together and influencing each other. That's my speculation. Right?
This reminded me, and I'm going to paraphrase it, of a quote by Thich Nhat Hanh. And he posed the question, do you want to change the world? And he said, if you try to change the world with your own problems, you're bringing even more chaos into the world. In order to change the world, change yourself.
Yeah. And that was said also by Gandhi. And before Gandhi, that was said by Blavatsky. Blavatsky, in the Key to Theosophy, they asked her, do you get involved in politics? And she said, as a society, we don't, because you cannot solve the world by means of politics. She says, as long as the human beings who are chosen to lead the others are selfish, no system will work. So she says, we need to first transform the human nature, and then everything will be fine. And this is, yes, a principle that, makes sense with a little thought.
That's just what you Radha for human generation. Sri Ram did a lot of work.
Yeah. So Radha Burnier and Sri Ram talked about human regeneration, and this is exactly the principle. The best way to help the world is to change yourself. That doesn't mean you cannot try to help in the external world with some kind of activism, etc. But external work is like putting a Band-Aid on something that is bleeding. You need to do that. But if there is a deeper cause, you will have to be constantly putting Band-Aids on the person. So while some people need to work on putting the Band-Aid there, other people need to be looking at working at the real cause. As an organization, Blavatsky says, we try to work on the cause of human suffering. Individual members can choose also to work on the effects, try to palliate the suffering, external suffering.
Here,
Yes.
I have one question. With respect to reading some theosophical literature, they talk about relation to the first, second, and third logos, Brahma, Vishnu, and Maheshwara. There is that analogy also stated. So, how do you correlate what we see here to that? And is there a correlation, or are they standalone?
Yes, there is a correlation. Every time you compare one tradition with the other, the correlations are up to a certain point only, because different traditions describe different aspects of the same principles. But normally there is, in theosophical literature, Blavatsky would correlate the third logos with Brahma, the one that is the creator, then the second logos with Vishnu, that is the preserver, and the first logos, with Brahman, Brahman as not the creator, but the neutral term that is the reality, the space within which all happens. So normally it's Brahman, Vishnu, and Brahma, or sometimes you can put Shiva there instead of Brahma, depending on what aspect you are looking at. But yes, that's the typical correlation.
So is our
Yes.
So can we say that our aspects here, like Atman, Buddhi, Manas, they are related to that? They get influenced by those forces, cosmic forces on us too?
Yeah.
Or is it like
it stands independent.
Yeah, no, they are directly connected. Like, sometimes Blavatsky would talk about Mahat, the universal mind, as an aspect of the creative forces of Brahma. Let's say, you have all these deities that are the Manasaputras, the mind-born deities that come from Brahma. So the universal mind, which is part of the third logos, our mind is a direct emanation from the universal mind. We are connected to the universal mind. And she said, this is why in meditation, you can go all the way back to the universal mind. And this is what enlightenment, part of what enlightenment means. So all our principles are directly connected. Brahman, the neutral, is the source of what we call Atman in the theosophical view, right? Then, because Brahman and Para-Brahman, Blavatsky would make a difference between Brahman and Para-Brahman. I don't know how technically correct that is in Vedanta, for example. In Vedanta, the idea is that Para-Brahman is the highest aspect of Brahman. So she would say Para-Brahman is the source of our Atman, and Brahman is the source of our Buddhi. But anyway, we don't need to go into the details. The idea is that, yes, all these principles are connected. This is all that I have been saying, is that we are connected to those deities, which, in the theosophical view, they are not people up there. These deities are states of consciousness and forces that we can tap into. And that's why whenever you are creative, it is Brahma that is working through you. Brahma as this creative principle. And that's how the theosophical tradition looks at this.
Do I have time for one more?
Yeah, and then we can take a break so Michelle can. Yes.
You talked briefly mentioned about Manasaputras, and the other term I come across frequently is Pitris.
Petrus.
Can you give me a little bit deeper insights into those? I always get confused and I don't have a real good understanding of.
Yeah. Well, very briefly, because this is a whole subject in itself, but HPV used in general, the idea in Hinduism of Pitris are your ancestors. So, your grandparents, etc. But she says in the esoteric philosophy, the word Pitri is used also for our spiritual ancestors, for all these divine beings that, because she says in one of the quotes I didn't read, you know where your body comes from, you know your genealogy at the level of the body, you know your family history, but do you know the genealogy of your inner principles? Because our inner principles come from all these celestial beings. So the different celestial beings are Pitris also, our ancestors, or part of our parents in a sense. And there are two in particular that work in building a human being. What she calls the Barhisha Pitris. These are a kind of Pitris that help evolution on the physical plane so that nature develops the human form. And then there is what sometimes she would call Manasaputras or Agnishvata, which are the Pitris that work on the awakening of our intellectual aspect. All this is described in the second volume. That's kind of hard. As Dost said, you can read Annie Besant's The Human Pedigree. In Spanish, it has a different title, so I always mess it up. So The Human Pedigree by Annie Besant, she summarizes all these things with the Pitris.
Yes.
Yeah, and always consult the Theosophy Wiki, theosophy.wiki, which we try to put all the information there. And we need to stop so that...
That's all right. Yes, Pablo sends me to the Theosophy Wiki every time I ask him a question. So it is a great source of those types of questions there. Yes.
I'm part of the ones developing the wiki, and I'm developing the wiki so I don't have to answer the same questions always. So I put all that I can. Oh, this is cool. I put in the wiki, go to the wiki.
There's another question.
I have one.
Okay, last one.
Last one. Thank you. There's a correlation in the heart with the sun, the solar sun. Can you elaborate on the solar sun versus the central spiritual sun.
So HPV, as I mentioned, HPV says that the physical sun that is a reflection of inner principles, like everything else in the cosmos. Our physical body is an expression of our spiritual nature. So she talks about a central sun that is the source of all that consciousness and energy, etc., that comes through the physical sun. And sometimes she talks about 3 suns or 7 suns, etc. But the idea is that because the physical sun is connected or correlates with the physical heart, then the physical heart correlates to the Buddhic principle in us. She explains here, the brain correlates to manas, the heart correlates to Buddhi. Michelle talked a little about that. She showed you a quote. So we can make the correlation that the central sun corresponds to our Buddhi, because you have those vertical correlations, then you can draw the parallel ones, the horizontal ones. All right, thank you everyone. Let us take a break.
Let's take a little break first. Okay. I think we get more coffee.